Good evening, everybody. Please be advised this meeting will be recorded and posted on the Council's YouTube channel. Can all those speaking ensure you switch off your microphone before addressing the meeting and make sure to switch it off when you finish speaking, please. Thank you all for joining us here this evening and welcome to Councillor Cousins to her first Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. I've got apologies from Councillor Hyland, who's the Cabinet Member for Finance, Resources and Social Value. Any more apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for leaving early. Thank you.
Item number 2, urgent business. There's no urgent business. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Does any member have any personal or financial interest to declare on any items on the agenda? I see none. Minutes are, members happy to agree the minutes of the last meeting? Great, thank you. So moving on to the first substantive item, item number 5, which is the annual contract performance report for the Resources Directorate. And I think, have we got Stephanie there and Damon? Are you? And Ian as well. I'll hand it over to you to decide how you want to present the report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the Procurement Act 2023 brought about changes to the way that contract performance should be highlighted to members, either in terms of overall achievement, delivery of social value objectives, financial health of the suppliers, or how we were resolving problems if there were any. Contract standing orders agreed by Council in June 2024 put in place a requirement for chief officers to provide this information, and this is the report for the Resources Directorate. There is no prescribed format for this reporting, but the Resources Directorate is the first to report, setting out performance of significant contracts, i.e. value of £2 million and over, to Overview and Scrutiny. Members may wish to review the format after we've been sort of through the process itself, given that it is one directorate and clearly there are the majority of the Council's directorates are yet to follow. The report includes summary information against the performance criteria on page 20 and detailed pro formas against each of the contracts noted. Also appended is a list of the direct awards and contract variations approved for the Resources Directorate in the first 6 months of 2025-26. So around the chamber we have the relevant contract managers who will be here to take questions. And again, I'll just circling back to the bit about the format of how we're doing that, the new report. Obviously, as we go to replicate this for other directorates, we could see similar numbers of people sort of attending sort of committee going forward. So one for you, Chair, and colleagues to sort of consider how we do that going forward. But I think at that point, I think we'll take the report as largely read and wait questions.
Thank you, Damon. Can you confirm that the rest of the directorates will be bringing the reports during this municipal year? Because I think that was the original intention of the work programme.
Yeah, I think the original intention was to try and bring it all in one go, but I think subject to what members sort of consider tonight and with your agreement, then we will just schedule them in the forthcoming meetings.
Perfect, thank you. Does anyone have any? Yes, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on the reports on social value, some clarity really. I noticed a couple, MF Telecom, partial, Microsoft not met, some were partial, leaseholders, none, Wolseley completed all of theirs. So basically, what's partial, not met? I know what they mean, but what do they mean in the aspect of the report? And do we lean on these people that don't meet their part of the social value? Thank you.
Thank you. If you let me answer the first part, and then if you want further details on the contracts themselves, the contract managers are here to provide more detail. In terms of the yellow amber colour, they're largely met. So where social value was offered, most of the social value contributions have been made. Where they are amber, fully amber, this is where no social value was agreed at the time for that particular contract. Now, some of these were set up a long time ago when social value was not as considered a significant priority in the procurement team or across the council. We have rectified that since now, and the current financial system, the replacement financial system, we are looking that there are social value targets agreed for that. The insurance ones are slightly different because these are more financial products than actual contracts. The principle of the Social Value Act was not meant to really apply to these types of contracts. But again, moving forward, it's something that we can consider, but will be difficult in that market.
Thank you. If I can ask Councillor Fletcher, do you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Chair, just a quick one. Is there any way of putting in future reports exactly what that social value has been used for and where it's gone, please?
So there are some details in the pro formas that will obviously be. This is the first of these reports, so yes, I think this is something that we would develop further. Our new procurement management, procurement management system has the ability to record in social value in quite a lot of detail, and we also have Match My Project now. Resources contracts are probably the least likely to have delivered the detail that you would be looking for here, but you will see that start to evolve as you see the other contracts coming forward from the other departments, and the detail will be there in much more. There's a little more in the pro formas, but at the moment we have the information is patchy. This is because previously central recording was not in place, so we are just getting into the process of actually doing that in more detail now.
On the social value portal, the Match My Project mentioned in 4.7, which seems like a really great initiative, it says a number of projects have been delivered and sign-up has been increasing. But I just wondered if you could give a bit more detail on what is meant by a number and if you could give any examples.
So there are examples. They're actually not in resources, but they are across the council. We've had two significant community developments. So we've had refurbishment of a community kitchen and building of a refurbishment of a building for the Men in Sheds project in Eltham. So those were two quite large and high-profile developments. And there are a number of smaller things where people have given chairs and laptops and other small volunteering hours. We've had some support to some community organisations financially and practically. But they aren't from the Resources Directorate contracts, so that's why they're not highlighted here. You will see a bit more of that next time.
Great, thank you. I have to admit, I didn't know about this until I read this report. I wonder how many other councillors know and therefore could point their community groups in this direction, because I do think it's a really good initiative. So I think that's one for us to take away to sort of share with other councillors, because I think you might get a lot more take-up as well. And it seems like a really good initiative, I would say. Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly echo that. It's a great idea. Could I ask about the housing management system, which is amber rated on general performance, KPIs and risk, and no social value plan agreed? But the contract was awarded 2.2 million only in April, and it just, without asking about the specific, don't we insist on social value plans being agreed at the point of procurement when we've got maximum leverage over the supplier? Why, in that case, why has a contract been entered into without a social value plan?
This is an extension contract, although it's a new date. So the housing management system, the Northgate system, had been in place for some years. So this was a new award for this contract. It was the fact that no social value was agreed. I think this is something that we now need to develop with the supplier over the next contract period so that we can deliver that. I mean, it was an oversight, I think, in our part, and we are pushing our resources contractors much more to deliver social value, and you will see that come through in the future.
Thank you for the candour. That's useful. And it's interesting that all our questions so far, we've all been drawn to social value as members, so perhaps we could ask for every opportunity as a committee to maximise leverage on new contracts and also contract extensions and renewal, because many of these suppliers want to engage in social value, and for others it's another regulatory burden that they try to avoid. So I think we should use every leverage. Maybe if I suggest that as a recommendation, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I would agree with that recommendation. If you want to wordsmith it, we can come back to it at the end, but I think members would be supportive of that recommendation. Councillor Fahy?
Thank you, Chair. I recall the last meeting I asked too many questions, so you told me off afterwards, and I didn't sleep a wink that night. So I'll just tell me to be quiet at a particular point if you so wish. I was a bit disappointed about this report because I find it major gaps in the identifying the whole council network around procurement. So am I given to understand that the Resources Directorate is one element? So how many more elements of procurement exist across the council? Because I thought at one stage, after the Act was passed, that the council were going to move to a situation of all of the contracts coming under one umbrella. So why hasn't that happened? That's my first question.
Thanks, John, and sorry, Councillor Fahy. But it's just to reiterate as well that the rest of the directorates will be bringing their reports. But I think it's a good point about knitting them all together. So we'll pass that over to the officers. But they will be bringing their reports in this municipal year as well. So we will be looking at other ones.
Well, I think, Chair, that's very important to mention. But I do think in order for us to get our heads round the corporate approach, I think everybody needs to sit in the one room to discuss what the council is doing generally to comply and support what's going on in relation to procurement.
Thank you. Is this one for you, Stephanie?
Well, I think that there's two reasons why you've just got resources at this point. The main reason is that there's quite a lot of us here already and a significant number of contracts. If we had all of the contracts from all of the relevant directorates, and there's 7 directorates in total, we'd have probably needed a much longer meeting. It would have got the things, important issues would have got lost, I think, in the weeds. So what we wanted to do is to bring one sort of manageable amount at this point for you to have a look at the type of information that we're providing, seeing if that's the information that you were looking for. Then when we've got that feedback from you, because as the Director of Resources said at the beginning, there is no prescribed format for this. So we had to come up with what we think is the most important parts of the information for you. And then when you feed back to us, we can then bring that in a better format or with the detail that may be missing this time to the next meeting. And so each time it should be an incremental improvement, but we had to start somewhere.
So in terms of the other colleagues have raised the issue about social value, and I think there's a number of companies who are procuring work in the borough, doing an enormously good job in terms of supporting communities and all of that. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen across the board. So in reality, am I to understand that there is still not a percentage value existing in all of the contracts that the council procures across the council?
So we have to look at social value on a case-by-case basis. It's delivery of social value as an as an amount is very difficult to calculate or evidence. What we look for more is actual delivery of benefits to residents and the community. So each contract is, we look at each contract to see how practical it is for them to deliver social value. And some contracts are much easier to deliver social value for than others. If you have a contract where people are working in the borough, you've got opportunities for employment, apprenticeships, training, local spend, community volunteering. If you've got a software provider who is based somewhere else, we have to buy the software from them if that is the most suitable piece of software. It's more difficult for them to provide social value. It doesn't mean they can't do anything at all, and we will work towards that. But it isn't as straightforward as those who are actually working here. So everything will be different. We will try to maximise the benefits for each individual contract, and we are focusing much more on that now. And all of our social value will be tailored to the Our Greenwich missions. So each new procurement from now on will actually have to demonstrate where the bidders are saying that they can deliver social value that matches what we have said in Our Greenwich that is important to us.
Well, Chair, the situation is up and down the country following the introduction and passing of the Act. Many local authorities have determined a social value across its procurement strategy. So why haven't we done that? And I just give an example. If you look at Preston, and you can measure any of the councils up and down the country, that they have determined a social value which is measured and adopted, which each company has to apply. And I just think the way we're doing it currently is simply bizarre in my view.
Everyone is different. We are adopting the method that seems to work best here in Greenwich. I'm not criticising other authorities for doing their social value in the way that suits them, but this is how we have determined is the best for Greenwich. And within the resources that we have and in the financial climate that we have, we are maximising those benefits as far as possible. If you were talking, Councillor Fahy, about an amount that we would put on a scoring mechanism, that's different. If that relates to your question, no. See, I didn't think it was. So, but we are putting a minimum of 10% on social value scoring against the criteria, but not in terms of a value in kind. We do not measure it in that kind. I do not believe that those values can be evidenced and are worth actually using in methods. We have used the social value portal in the past. It promises social value of massive amounts of delivery. When actually it's delivered, you cannot evidence that that value is achieved. What we're looking for more is actual things happening, buildings being built, centres being refurbished, volunteering carried out, people's lives improved. That is difficult to put a value on financially. I know a lot of councils try to do that. I know the Social Value Portal have done that. I do not personally believe that that is right, and it is not something that we have decided that we are going to implement here.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up on the scoring? You said we do 10% social value scoring. Do you know what our peers do, by any chance?
That's generally the amount, 10%. It can vary. We have gone higher on some contracts. It's at least 10% of the quality element of the score, obviously taking price out. But overall, sometimes it's 10% in total of the 100% so it might be say 15 of the total 100% score if you take price into account.
Thank you. Councillor Cousins?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for welcoming me to my first meeting. Could I ask, it's two questions, but the first one is about the key KPIs. Who sets the contract? Do the contractors set their own standards and we just agree to it, or are we setting the standards and then monitoring them against that? And then when there is non-achievement or some sort of satisfactory pass mark, what are the consequences? Thank you.
So we would set the KPIs. We would normally put those KPIs in the specification at the point we went out to tender, so that bidders can look at those and determine whether or not they are achievable. We may have some small negotiation around the targets, but generally the KPIs, the types of indicators that we determine show that the contract is delivering to the standard that we expect. We set them ourselves. In terms of monitoring, we ask contractors to provide data against those KPIs on a regular basis. It varies, but quarterly is quite regular. Then, when they do not achieve those, we challenge them. Non-achievement, it does depend on the individual contract, but non-achievement of KPIs two times running without mitigating factors. There may sometimes be a mitigating factor. There is always the opportunity to put in a contract default. Contract defaults can lead to termination. Clearly, that is obviously the option that we wouldn't want to take, because then that means we're risking the service, we need reprocurement. But we would generally work with the contractor or supplier to try and improve to meet those targets in the first place. That's why we share them at the beginning, so that they're aware of how we're going to measure them, and they know that we will follow up on them afterwards. And we do that, and we've done that recently in some contracts, and we have actually put out default notices against particular contracts, not in resources, so they aren't mentioned here, in order to resolve those, and they have been resolved.
Thank you, Chair. Can I continue? It was two. That's the first question. I also wanted to say that I am aware of the Match My Project scheme, and that's because I've assisted projects in my ward with that and passed it on to others. But I do have to feed back that I think that scheme needs to look at who is benefiting, because it looks as though the contractors probably benefit more. I don't think a lot of the projects are easy to match that are posted. And then the few that are, the contractors are very good at alleging the social value is extortionate in terms of what the group might consider the works actually done. So they might paint a wall and lay a flooring and allege that 600,000 equivalent, So I think we need to look at what they're actually doing and how they're doing their social value reporting around that. Thank you.
I think there's 2 points to your question, Councillor Cousins. The first is the difficulty in matching. We need to follow up on that. Every community organisation based in Greenwich can apply to be part of the Match My Project portal. All our suppliers can also be part of the portal. Matching them together is obviously a tricky business, but we need to try and push that a bit more. We're still at early stages, really. It's only been about 6 months that we've been live with that. As time goes on, we'd hope to improve the numbers of matches. And I think in terms to your second point on the financial benefit, I don't think I've seen as much as 600,000 for that, but this is where we go back to how much is social value worth. I don't take any notice of that figure whatsoever. What do I see in that? I see that the community organisation wanted their wall painted, their fence repaired. That enabled them to have more meetings or to a safe place for children to play, or whatever that was. That's important to me, not the value. The value is less important. It's actually the difference that it makes to people's lives. So I don't take much notice of the finance. When we will report on Match My Project for other directorates, we won't be telling you about the money. We'll be telling you about the activities.
Thank you. Sorry, yes.
Happy. Oh, thank you, Chair. Councillor Fahy lured me into a question about the Social Value Act. 15 years ago, I was a parliamentary researcher working for the MP who passed the Social Value Act, Chris White. I tell people I did some very important photocopying for that legislation. as a young man. The point of the Social Value Act was obviously to make sure public sector is leveraging social value out of suppliers, as we've talked about. I've since, in my professional life, been on the other side of the Act, working for a charity bidding for public sector contracts. And what many charities find, and this was my experience, is that actually the Act and the way it's implemented actively penalises charities and voluntary sector community groups who find it harder, perversely, to crowbar what they do into the 10% the tick boxes that you need to get the 10% in the procurement process. So corporates have the resources to be able to put a very good pitch together and do some very specific things, paint a wall in a community centre, fix a kitchen, fine. If you're a charity wanting to deliver a service for Greenwich Council and everything you do is social value, you end up having to crowbar yourself to meet the goal. This is not just a Greenwich Council problem, it's a public sector problem. Could I just ask your view on that, and perhaps to look into it to make sure that we're not penalising charities from actually competing on an even playing field with corporates when it comes to social value?
Completely understand your point. It is very difficult for the smaller organisations to be able to actually state they can do a lot of social value. What we have to do is help them express themselves in the fact that they are possibly a local organisation, that brings added value that way. Their work goes above and beyond what they might be delivering for this contract. That is social value that they are delivering. It doesn't necessarily mean that they say, I'm going to do X in addition to this contract. They're already doing those other things, which they need to then highlight. So it's about helping them to highlight what they're already doing. That is social value. And this is part of the challenge of social value and looking at it that way, because a lot of the contracts really, what does the council do? It delivers social value. We are delivering social value to our communities. So bringing that out for some of the organisation is really important. And I think what we will try to do as we move into next year is perhaps bring in more smaller organisations and try and help them express themselves in a way that will meet that. And again, that is a way that we wouldn't calculate that amount of money. It's more about the added value that they're already giving rather than they say they will do for this contract. They're already doing it by just being there and supporting local people.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My eyesight's going, so I can't see all the names. I know Alex, but I can't see all the names. I presume some of the officers here actually are delivering social value through what's in the front part of the report. Is that correct?
So they're contract managers for the contracts that are in the pro formas in Appendix B.
I was wondering if any one of them wanted to tell us their opinion on the social value and how they deal with it and what they're doing, just to give us a rough idea of their point of view, if that's all right.
I think Murray's put his hand up for this one.
So yeah, Murray James, I'm the interim digital executive here at Greenwich, so I'm covering a number of the system contracts that have been discussed. From our perspective, working in the IT space, we deal with largely large national companies or multinational companies. So social value has its challenges, but it's something we always try and achieve. The sorts of things that we do achieve can be, they're not the painting the wall or the building the community centre. They're more typically things around digital inclusion, so things like training. One of the things that corporations love to do is to sponsor staff awards and things like that, although that wouldn't necessarily tick our box as social value. We typically try and find that space where most of these organisations have corporate social responsibility programs that they try and align our social value requirements to what they are able and willing to give. But I'll be honest, it's sometimes a bit of a challenge. What they are able to offer doesn't necessarily align with what we are looking for as an organisation, and that's part of the challenge we then have when social value comes through in a procurement exercise. How do we then leverage it? But I think it's fair to say that we see the value of social value. and we understand what it gives, and we do typically try and chase it through achieve it through the contracts that we secure.
I'll come in as well, Chair. Two things. One is, just for an example, building what Murray is saying, the new financial systems provider is part sponsoring our staff awards. That's over and above. We didn't put something like that in the actual contract award, but you can use contract management to leverage other benefits in terms of there. So there's an actual practical example of what we're doing in that area. The contract manager for the Wolsey contract's not here, but that's actually quite a good exemplar. I know quite a bit about that because I used to manage that area a few years ago. It's where you can do a lot of work with the contractor, which is brought out in there, where you use your contract management skills to actually leverage the company in that particular case to actually use more local suppliers. You'll see in that pro forma that we work actively with Wolsey to increase through the supply chain the footprint of what is coming from companies that are based in Greenwich. How do you value that? It's almost impossible to value. You can value the outcome, but it's almost impossible to value that. These are a couple of examples of where I think, just coming back to the housing one that was also brought up, you can do things post. You can. There's an important step in the actual contract process where you would leverage social value, but you can also work proactively. One of the bits now in Steph's team, because I oversee that team, we now have a contract management and social value arm to that, which is there to actually partly answering one of Councillor Fahy's earlier questions. We've now got a greater central support that is providing advice, guidance, support to those directorates and gradually improving and changing the culture across the council in that respect. But procurements are such long-run things. As Steph's already mentioned, a number of these contracts would have been set before we would have been changing the culture in terms of that.
Thank you. Just a follow-up on the two, that's come through from the two things that you've both said on sponsorships. So you've mentioned staff awards sort of specifically. Do we explore sponsorships in any other arena, and to what extent are there potential ABC concerns with that type of thing?
Yeah, you have to be careful in terms of what the expectation back of it. That's why it will be done necessarily post-award, because you're not giving any indication. You have to be careful where you can actually do that. So I think another example, and Steph may have more details of this, is where our new highways provider sponsored a junior football competition across London and things like that, of which there was a Greenwich team in. Again, that's a good community-based thing of, relating to schools in that respect. And there's, so there are sponsorship. You have to be careful because of the law and in that respect, but you can do a lot more post than you can pre, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Councillor Fahy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering if you could answer my question around what regard, if any, are you giving to the Cooperative Commission, which the Council reported on back in February? What attention are you giving to the recommendations being made in that commission?
So obviously, development of cooperative organisations, or ensuring that our existing organisations have cooperative values, it's an important and a priority for Greenwich, but it's not an overnight development. We have to prioritise the delivery of services. It is of course, a massive benefit if we can have that from cooperative organisations, But we need those cooperative organisations in place so that they can bid for contracts and win contracts, and then we can work with them. It's a bit chicken and egg. It's a challenge because they need to develop in order to be able to successfully bid for a contract, and without the contract they may not have the resources and the funding to develop. So there are some smaller, as I understand, there are some smaller work programs going on, particularly in the social care arena, to try and develop smaller community organisations who could deliver some elements of service. But if you think about our bigger contracts, that is a longer term work in progress, definitely something we are working towards, but it's not going to happen overnight or in the next year or so before you see a significant number of contracts actually delivered in that way.
Councillor Cousins?
Sorry, thanks. Didn't recognise my name just then. Sorry, I'm sucking on it sweet. I think I've choked on it. Okay, what I wanted to ask was to do with best value. How are we ensuring that we're not being overcharged for contracts? I think it's a concern that local authorities tend to pay 100 or 200% what I would pay as an individual outside, say. So how are you ensuring that? Because we're in sensitive financial times at the moment. And then I did also wanted to find out whether staff or the actual people who are using, so for example, the IT, the telecoms, the computers, who is actually giving the satisfaction feedback? Is it our staff or is it just the contract managers? Thank you.
Not the easiest question to answer. In terms of feedback specifically, performance on contracts will be down to the users of those services. So if we are talking how well a system works, that will be both down to the contract manager, the internal contract manager, and feedback that they will have received from people that use the system and whether or not it did what we expected it to. Could you repeat your first question, Councillor Cousins? Apologies. I think I got distracted by the thought that you might be choking.
Sorry, thanks. I've got I suppose it's a cold or something, and then I'm sucking on a mint, which doesn't help. But thanks for your concern. Yes, what I'm trying to find is how we ensure best value,
Right.
that we're not overpaying for contracts, whatever contracts they are. In this case, you're looking at the resources ones, that we're not overpaying because we're in sensitive times, and the assumption and certainly belief tends to be that local authorities pay exorbitant amounts for a contract, where if it was me, I'd probably pay a third or less than half of what the local authority pays.
We have to operate in a competitive environment where we put contracts out to tender or quotes. We will then evaluate the results of that process to secure the best value for the council. Now, that isn't necessarily the cheapest, and our requirements may be higher. It's possibly less obvious in the Resources Directorate, but if you talk about, say, the cost of housing repairs, we put a lot of control and compliance into work such as housing repairs, quality standards, accreditations, making sure that the work done is high standard and extremely safe. That does come at a premium, but we still put those requirements out. We still get the best value that we can out of them. It is a challenge. I believe that some contractors believe that councils have more money than we actually do, but they have to all be in it, because otherwise, if we went out to tender and we got four tenders back, if 3 were really expensive and 1 was really cheap, we'd have to go, are the ones expensive unreasonably so, and is the one that is too cheap unreasonably so? as a consumer, we aren't always in that position to make that judgment as well. And sometimes we get good services from contracts that we buy for ourselves, or a home renovation or something like that. And sometimes we don't. We have to make sure that what we get is delivered every time. And believe me, I know that sometimes that doesn't happen, but the majority of times it does. You will only ever hear if something goes wrong generally, which is why these reports are coming forward, so that we can actually tell you when things are working well, rather than when you get complaints from your ward residents saying so-and-so didn't happen, because you'll only hear the bad things. People aren't going to turn up and go, somebody did a really good job repairing my roof. So it's a challenging time, but we are, I promise you, we are doing our best.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Councillor Mbang.
A few times, yes. Thanks, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I think my area of inquiry I want to know is on social value scoring. What is the measure? What is the indicators that you use? Is it just about the money? What about the people that we speak to, the engaging with the people? And what about a situation where we have different, like what is a priority in Arsenal is not possibly the priority in Woolwich Dockyard because of the nature of what do you call the category of people who are there in that sense. So could you just comment on that, please? Thank you.
So in terms of scoring, what we do, and we will do enhanced moving forward, is match the scoring against the council's priorities. So where a social value offer closely matches what we're looking for in our council, in our priorities, it will get a higher score than one that is generally reasonable social value but has not been highlighted as one of our priorities. So that's how that scoring would work. It's an interesting point you raise about priorities being different in location, and I think that is definitely something that we could think of, particularly where we have contracts that deliver to a certain area only. So some of the construction contracts are delivering to a particular ward, and therefore we could look at trying to tailor those social value offers to those ward priorities. More often than not, our contracts are borough-wide. With resources, they're all borough-wide. So it's not as, we don't really match up to ward priorities, but it's an interesting way to think about it, and I will just definitely discuss that with the team. Thank you.
And Chair, if you permit me, just finally also to find out, I mean, the well is now like a village, and we learn from other boroughs. Do we benchmark, do we learn from other boroughs how they are doing it effectively, or are people also learning from us? If you can also let us know about that. Thank you.
Yes, so I'm part of the London Heads of Procurement Group, so that's all the heads of procurement across London boroughs. Social value is something we discuss on a regular basis, who's doing what, how we're achieving it, where the challenges are. So we all try and learn from each other, and that's why it's an evolving project. And interestingly, a number of my peers are moving away from using the social value portal, moving into different methods. Match My Project is becoming much more popular. So we're looking at that different ways and trying to build on other people's good practice and vice versa too.
Thank you. I have two questions on specific contracts. The first one's the housing management system. So obviously the metrics for general performance and KPIs and risks aren't great there. And it mentions in paragraph 4.11 that there's recurring escalation meetings and that seems to be proved successful so far in expediting the resolution of issues. Do we expect those meetings are going to be enough to turn these KPIs and the performance to green? Or what is the plan for improvements there? And sorry, I don't know who I'm looking at. I'm assuming it's somebody.
Yeah, that would be me again. So yes, what you're reading in the report is actually a reflection of quite a long period of time with the housing system. It's been, as was just indicated earlier, we just recently upgraded it to a new version, and sort of leading into that upgrade, there were a number of operational failures with the system itself, which have sort of exacerbated that situation. And then we went through quite a difficult and long project to get the new system in, which there was some operational shortcomings, shall we say. So all of that has led to some operational concerns on the project. They're not necessarily at a contractual level where SLAs are being breached, and certainly the conversations that have taken place to date are positive and heading in the right direction. So when I spoke to the team who are involved in that earlier in the week and managing that remediation, they were confident that we will get to a place, but because it has now been marked as at risk, it is certainly something we will be watching very closely. If the situation deteriorates, then we do have the hooks in the contract to take action against that. But as we say, at this point in time, we would hope not to. Our focus is on actually getting the system working properly.
Thank you. My second question is on the ATEC technology-enabled care services. Who do I look at for that? Is that you again, Murray?
That would be me again, yes.
Okay, so I've noticed that the date of that contract is from the 1st of February 2025, and that the key issue there is the supply of financial health, which is done by an external agency, that rating, I believe, is my understanding of the report. So I think my question there is really, are those ratings not done before we procure? Because it's only been since February.
Yes, we do them all the time. So this, we do a rating during the procurement, and then we do a 6-monthly check thereafter. So this is the first 6-monthly check. Low to moderate is actually not a level at which we would consider it a major concern. In the procurement process, we then get our accountancy colleagues to check accounts and make sure that there's nothing of significant concern, and there wasn't at that time. So that's why we have had conversations with our Alcove since, which Murray may be able to tell you a bit more about, but it is something that we're doing regularly. So all our significant contracts will have a 6-monthly Dun & Bradstreet check. That we've only just put in place in the last year. So that's part of the way that we will monitor performance going forwards in terms of financial health, and we will feed that back to contract managers and ask them to raise that with their suppliers to make sure that we are comfortable of their ability to maintain the service.
So just in this specific case, has the rating been downgraded since the initial rating during the procurement process, or is it at the same level? There are other factors that mean it's not so much of a concern for us?
It's at the same level.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any further questions? So the only other thing I would like to sort of raise with the committee, just while we're all here, is this was the first report. It was on resources. Obviously, there's been a lot of questions of social value, and we'll come back to Councillor Hartley's recommendation in just a second. But how do we want to receive the rest of them? I think there's two options. We can bring them all in together at this meeting so that we can examine them as a group. And I would suggest that if we get that report in good enough time, we can flag which contract managers we think would be sensible to come rather than a whole department coming based on the questions that we have, or we can assign them to the panels that make the most sense. So, for example, a children's directorate going to the children's services panel. So do people feel like they'd rather they all come here at once or that they go to individual panels? Any thoughts from the committee? Councillor Fahy?
I suggest they all come here, Chair, and then we determine the council's corporate strategy.
Councillor Cousins?
Yes, I'm happy to agree with that, but I also believe the key committees should get the individual reports so that they can drill down as well. Thanks.
That's a good point. We can ask all the chairs to make sure they share in advance of that meeting. So I think that Damon, you and I and Stephanie can pick this up separately, exactly how we do it. It will also save Stephanie from answering the same questions about social value at 6 different panels. I would say that in terms of the detail of the report, I think it's been really helpful, and I like the transparency of having a pro forma for each contract. I think that really does aid transparency. We can then pick out where the problem areas are. You can see from the committee that more detail on the social value projects is probably the most helpful. Councillor Hartley, do you have the wording of your recommendation?
Yeah, it's a bit, yeah, okay. I'll give it a go. We recommend that the procurement team sets and enforces an expectation that directorates must agree social value plans with suppliers before the point of signing either new contracts or contract extensions in order to maximise RBG's leverage at these key moments to secure social value for local communities. Park life.
We'll put that recommendation forward. Thank you. And that concludes that item. Thank you all very much for your time. I'll give you a second to vacate because I know otherwise it's quite disruptive. Great, so we're moving on to item 6, which is the infrastructure funding statement for 2024 to 25. Councillor Rahman, are you going to present the report?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. And apologies for my slight lateness. It's just, so got caught up in traffic a bit, so thank you very much. And so just to open the report, this evening we're presenting an update on the infrastructure funding statement for the financial year 2024-25. And as the CIL, well, Community Infrastructure Levy Charging Authority, we are required to produce and publish an annual statement outlining developer contributions received and how these funds were spent during the previous financial year. So this report provides a clear summary of the funds received, allocated and spent, together with the details of the infrastructure projects supported through developer contribution. These contributions include both the Community Infrastructure Levy, or CIL, and Section 106 agreements. It also explains the governance and decision-making framework that ensures investment decisions are aligned with Council's strategic priority. For 2024-25, a draft infrastructure funding statement is currently being prepared and will be presented to Cabinet on 3rd of December and 2025. Subject to approval, the final report will be published on the Council's website by the statutory deadline of 31st of December 2025. In 2024-25, the borough collected just over £5 million in community infrastructure levy, and the annual borough community infrastructure levy receipts vary depending on the timing of the development commencements and staged payment schedules, as collections are directly linked to schemes coming forward. Additionally, the borough secured more than £9 million in Section 106 planning obligations during that year, so that's 2024-25, and received payments exceeding £11 million. So taken together, these contributions represent a significant investment in the borough's infrastructure, ensuring the growth is supported by the facilities and services our communities need and getting those things done. Thank you.
Thank you. Damon, was there anything you want to add from your perspective?
Yeah, just to sort of build on that, I suppose the report provides a transparent account of sort of how developer contributions through CIL and Section 106 have been secured, allocated and invested to support growth and deliver vital infrastructure across the borough. Developer contributions play a critical role in ensuring that new developments benefit both existing and new communities. They enable us to fund essential projects such as affordable housing, education, health facilities, transport improvements and public realm enhancements, and help to create vibrant, sustainable neighbourhoods. So 2024-25 marked an important change in governance. Responsibility for the oversight and strategic allocation of CIL and Section 106 resources has now been brought under the remit of the Cabinet Member for Finance, Resources and Social Value and the Director of Resources, myself. This integration strengthens our ability to align infrastructure investment with the Council's medium-term financial strategy, corporate capital programme and wider priorities. It ensures that every pound collected is directed towards projects that deliver the greatest value for residents and contribute to our long-term objectives. Some of this can be seen by the recent example of the £60 million Getting Things Done programme, and with the completion of our major commitment to TfL for the Woolwich Crossrail station fit-out, we now have greater flexibility to invest in those new priorities, including the delivery of a SEND school and improvements to highways and public spaces. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from Councillor Cousins?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not the best on finances, but if you could help me with this, please. I'm understanding that we've collected just over 5 on the SIL, yeah? And we've collected just over 11 on the Section 106. But what, for 24-25 year, but what were we aiming to collect of both of those pockets? I assume there's a deficit. And then what are we doing about that deficit? I could be wrong, I don't know. Is there? And answer that one first, thank you.
Yeah, there's not a budget as such. It's not the same as we sort of treat the rest of the council's accounts, where funding is set aside to deliver specific objectives during the year. Because of the nature of it, it is dependent upon events taking place within the development community, such as a developer building out to the 50th unit, the 100th unit, or something like that. So those events are not within the council's control. Therefore, we do not budget. We know how much has been secured, and we report that, so we have full transparency around that. But we don't have any guarantees around the timing of those items coming through. Therefore, in terms of utilisation of it, it's more a question of once banked, we can then actually allocate at that point. To do so ahead of time actually presents and creates a sort of risk for the council, because we could be entering into a commitment to spend some money that we haven't got and might not get as well. It's a funny old world. You never quite know what's going to happen or not happen.
Can I just ask a follow-up on that point about commitments? Because when I was looking through these tables and trying to do basic maths, I was struggling a little bit with matching up some of the numbers. And I think, just to your point about commitments, when we're looking at, for example, the Sen Primary School at 6.5 million, it mentions that money has been committed. Do we have that money already, or are we committing future receipts?
So the money is secured in the bank. So it's in the accounts.
Councillor Cousins, sorry, did you have an additional question before I rudely interrupted?
That's okay. That's fine. It's fitted in nicely. I think for me the concern is we issue contracts, but it means really we can't do anything until the chicken lays its egg, so to speak. So we're sort of stuck. And I would have been under the impression that at the point of contract, there's a potential, and also the money that we're collecting this in 24-25 could have been owed from another year, isn't it? So I think it's quite simple but complicated at the same time, because we don't really know when we're earning the money. It's when we get it. But I still think we should have an idea of what we think, because also if we're not getting it, who is chasing up for it?
I think Councillor Cousins raises a really good point, and it triggered a memory from a previous overview and scrutiny when this report was brought a couple of years ago, when talking about sometimes the difficulties when people don't put in those notices to say that development has started. So can you speak to any improvements that you've made in that area in the last few years, please?
So when we're talking about the collection of SIL, we obviously issue liability notices at the point of a planning permission, and then we monitor those schemes, and the expectation is the developer needs to submit a commencement notice. I think that's what you're probably referring to. So we send reminders to developers that they need to do that before they commence on site. If they don't issue that notice prior to commencement, it can mean that they fall foul of the regulations and they have to pay the SIL immediately rather than benefit from the instalments policy or the 60-day payment terms. So that's how it's only at the point at which they commence that that money becomes due. So until that happens, it's not money we can bank on. Does that answer the question?
Partly. Can I just follow up on that, because memories are flooding back to me of when this was last, or at some point was brought in the last few years. How often is it the case that you find that development has commenced without those commencement notices being sent? Have you seen a decline in that? And if not, what are you doing about it?
I think the proactive nature of the officers now sending reminders has helped. There is the odd occasion where we still find out and we have to contact the developer and remind them. And in that case, we can impose surcharges if we think they haven't followed the regulations. But I would say it's less common now than it was at the time that you're referring to. It was definitely at that point an issue we were struggling with, but we've got a better system in place now to make sure we're reminding developers.
Councillor Richards-Cattell.
Thank you very much. I have a few sort of general questions. First of all, I think it's kind of great to see some of the things that this funding's been spent on, including like the Send School, the GMV block, all really good to see. One question is just, since it's kind of moved into Directorate for Resources, what kind of benefits or kind of things you've kind of learned or positives you've taken from that moving into your directorate? Second question is, obviously we mentioned the 10 million for the kind of Woolwich Elizabeth line, which I think we would all agree is a great investment. But do we see anything in the future of that size coming that we might be contributing to again, or do we feel that was kind of like quite a one-off situation? And then just the third question is about, you talked at the end of the report about priorities and prioritization. Could you sort of explain when the next, and how the infrastructure delivery plan kind of guides that? So maybe when is the next time that's going to be updated? And I have a vested interest in this, but when you look at the spend map, there's like not a lot of spending going along the riverside, but a huge amount of our development is happening along the riverside. So how can we see that that's kind of like development from that riverside development is sort of prioritised for enhancements to that area? Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to mix it up a bit, but just starting back with the change in the arrangements going forward. So I think if I was to put it in a nutshell, I think we've got this sort of more holistic view now in terms of ensuring that we've got all of the pots in one place. So as you can see, sort of, just thinking about one of the tables. Yeah, so for example, table 6 has got all of the different categories sort of listed out. I think there's been a sort of traditionally sort of fragmented approach in terms of like, well, how, you know, who's looking at, you know, which of a particular heading in there, and then that lends itself to that sort of siloed sort of approach, which we all sort of talk about from time to time and sort of frown upon. What this has meant is bringing this into the centre and saying, look, you know, a lot of the work that we do in the organisation is actually quite joined up and quite connected, and we need to have a connected approach to how we're actually going to sort of utilise this. But the important thing is actually to sit down at the beginning and say, well, look, what's the need? And what are the resources that we've got to deploy against those against, you know, the need in the borough? And then in the sort of the most intelligent and smartest way possible, you know, allocate the resources that we've got, because each one of these, say, Section 106 agreements that comes through is quite bespoke to that particular scheme. So it could be in a particular geographical location. It could be for one of the themes that you read in that particular table. It could even be a subcategory within that theme as well. So we have effectively a sort of huge sort of database now, which basically shows us all of the agreements, all of the categories, and we're able to effectively, you know, sort of determine from there what matches need, you know, sort of fairly instantly. But also, what it also shows us is potentially if we've got amounts that have been sort of received whereby, you know, there isn't something automatically that sort of comes to mind and says, well, you know, we've got a need over here and there's the resource. At times we could actually have a stranded resource, but no, there was need identified at the time the agreement went through, but other events have transpired. And now that amount is now maybe potentially no longer needed for the original purpose for which it was intended. So it enables us to go in and look at those as well, identify those, and then we need to determine for each of those what is the best way of extracting that and then utilising it for good. And again, meeting the wider objectives of the council. So we've got all of this in one place. I mean, because effectively you've got, previously you had sort of the planning side, but the planning side was also sort of receiving. You've now got that clear separation now between the planning and the actual sort of accounting for it and the utilisation. And some of this you can see through the Getting Things Done sort of programme as well. So again, utilising a wide range of resources, but including SIL, Section 106, you know, and I think as we said before, everything from sort of resurfacing through to SEND facilities. So, you know, we're putting it to sort of good use now. You mentioned three other things. We sort of mentioned about the station and the arrangement that was put into place there. There are lots of infrastructure needs, you know, now and into the future as well. Each of those will have probably some fairly sort of specific asks, but each of those we will look at on a case-by-case basis. You mentioned about the geography. Again, sort of looking there in terms of the riverside, as you say, more development there, you know, is going to require infrastructure quite clearly. So we'll have to wait and see what those exact plans are that come along there. But infrastructure will need to be sort of built out. But in turn, that development will in turn create more opportunities for more business development, and therefore more, you know, more funding to come in. So money in the bank and more to come, you know, to help fund that. I think Alex is going to take the third part that you'd mentioned as well.
Yes, so when it comes to the prioritisation of how this money is used, with Section 106, the legal agreement tends to be quite specific about how that money can be used. So we monitor that and make sure that we're clear how we can use those funds. We will then work with services to discuss what their plans are. So really it comes down to that, but also you mentioned the infrastructure delivery plan. That's the key document that really sets out what the key need is within the borough, and it's that document that will be the overarching decision making. The issue, I'm not sure when it was last updated in 2023. It's our planning policy team that lead on that. I don't know when we're next scheduling. I imagine it'll be next year, but I can certainly find that out and feed that back.
Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to support the question around whether or not we are forward planning for any future expenses. And I'm thinking in terms of the Woolwich station. Will we be responsible for any maintenance or anything, or has that clearly been taken off our hands and there's no future ghost to come back and say, oh, by the way, you're supposed to be giving us X amount? And then there are things, some big infrastructure project that really impacts quite a lot of residents and visitors, which is the foot tunnels. So things like that, should we be putting aside funds to make sure that we have money should the lift go or whatever the next major issue will be? Thank you.
I mean, in terms of the first question and the station, I mean, it's quite a sort of clearly defined agreement. That agreement has now been fulfilled, and that is the end. So that's it there. In terms of other sort of projects, and I'd sort of hear the one that sort of mentioned, I mean, clearly there are further discussions to be had about the arrangements, you know, for those facilities going forward. We will, depending on how those sort of conversations go, we will need to determine, you know, what resources need to be set aside, you know, how much, when, etc. You know, and whether we're talking about, you know, the actual tunnel infrastructure itself or the facilities that operate inside them as well, because they're very different sort of items and have very different sort of price tags attached to them as well. But I think, you know, discussions first.
Councillor Fahy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for a very informative and detailed report. I'm looking at paragraph 4.5, which relates to the demand of notices 47, although we don't get all the 47 notices, I don't think. But I was interested regarding the SIL regulations relating to charitable relief, social housing relief, self-build and residential annexes. What work do we do, if any, on these elements? Thanks.
So this is set out within the schemes that can benefit from that relief is very clearly set out in the regulations, and there are specific forms that have to be completed by the developer in order to benefit from those reliefs. So we, as the collecting authority, we wait for the applicant to provide that information, we review it, and if we think that that meets the regulations, we will apply that relief to the liability notice. There's an expectation, certainly with the self-build relief, I think once you've occupied for a certain period of time, you have to demonstrate you're still living in that property. With the social housing relief, there's a 7-year clawback. So if the developer sells any of those affordable units and converts them back to private, we can claw back the SIL. So it's just a case of monitoring schemes and making sure before those critical dates we've checked with them what the position is.
That's really interesting. So only 7 years for clawback. Does that get exploited at all? So do developers say that they're going to do social housing, they have some affordable rent for 7 years, and then as soon as the timer goes, it changes, or is that quite rare?
I've not seen that, I'm not aware of it, but it's something that we could probably look into and explore.
Any other questions from the councillors? No. There was one question from a member of the public. Neil, if you'd like to step up to the microphone.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask about, there's transparency and there's a big database of these things. Can I ask about the back end of the process? So could we see some examples of showing that the money has been spent where it's said to be spent? So 2 examples I would ask for. Norman House on the corner of Norman Road had some funding in which specifically identified it as local cycling infrastructure. So what was that spent on, as an example? The other one I thought of was Armourers Court. There's a lot of money, Armourers Court. Where has that been spent, or is it not spent yet? Or is there some direction of where? Just getting an idea of seeing the things actually on the ground once the SIL or S106 money has come in. Is there a way of looking at something like that? Thank you.
Thank you. Are you able to respond on those points, or if not, I'm happy to receive details afterwards that I can pass on.
I can't speak to those schemes specifically, but the intention of this annual report is to provide some of that transparency and clarity. I don't know if what you're referring to is recent spend or from a few years ago, but I can certainly take away and we can look at those obligations and see where they went. That's a report back.
Yeah. Neil, would you be able to email me the specific examples if you've got any more detail, and I can pass it on? If you don't have any more detail, then the recording of this will be enough. Thank you. And I think that concludes this item. Thank you all very much for attending. The final item, which Councillor Richards-Cattell managed to foreshadow in her questioning, is the long-awaited Thames Path review, which, having obviously we've all read it, is really, really excellent, and I'm looking forward to hearing you present it. So I will hand over to you. We can take a brief pause. Great, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm very pleased to present this report to the panel, and it marks the end of over a year-long in-depth review into the Thames Path, which I led as Chair of Transport and Place Scrutiny. And although sort of solo tonight, I think this report you will see is indebted to many people. The panel included 8 councillors, including kind of 2 academics, 3 RBG officers. There's also a huge amount of individuals and organisations that took part in terms of professional practice, public bodies, external stakeholders, and their names are all listed in the contributors section. And also for the first time in Scrutiny in Greenwich, we collaborated with universities, with University College London and University of Greenwich, and that was very, I think, invaluable in what happened there. I was going to give special thanks to Nasir Ali, who's ill tonight, but was a huge partner in this, and very much I would say, I have this idea, and he would be like, this is how we achieve that within Scrutiny. And it was very great teamwork. I'm going to sort of speak to the main designed report, not the cover report, which is online, or it's also in your packs, page 72. But I'll just give some sort of opening remarks of why we did it, speak about the kind of scrutiny process and evidence gathering we did, and then recommendations, and then happy to take any questions on it. So, kind of what the reason behind doing it was, we as a borough have the longest stretch of river in London. We've got 14 kilometres, and that's going from Greenwich to Charlton, Woolwich to Thamesmead. And I think very much that came through is that that Thames Path and that riverside really tells the story of this borough. And you get pass through all kinds of areas. It's residential, industrial, leisure spots, iconic landmarks, green spaces, everything. And it's obviously an area where people are cycling and walking, but it's also just where residents spend time and sort of enjoy themselves. And also kind of rarely in London, we have almost uninterrupted public access to it. Whereas if you think of other parts of London where you can't necessarily walk by the river, we, in almost all of it, can, which is great. And also part of the inspiration for looking into this was we're going to see, as I mentioned, a lot of regeneration along the river with thousands of homes planned. And it's how do we sort of protect and enhance that path as this city and our borough evolves around it. Which obviously I was sort of keen to do as part of my sort of scrutiny in transport and placemaking, and also having spent over 3 years on planning board and having seen quite a lot of applications come to the planning board that are on the riverfront. There was extensive evidence we did, which we did find quite a lot of challenges, which I'll kind of go into around kind of inconsistent surfacing and access, fragmented ownership, poor lighting, and those sort of things. But I think for me, what's come through the whole of this experience is that it's basically a hugely vital public asset that we have of the riverside, of this path along the riverside. And we as a council, and I hope the recommendations kind of show it, it's sort of part of our role, I think, to help realise its full potential and kind of preserve it and enhance it. And I think that's, as a council, we have a kind of, there's opportunity and responsibility there about being the steward of that. There are over 31 recommendations in the report, which is a lot. It could have been more. But I think the main overarching one that incorporates a lot of that is that we sort of call for a sort of borough-wide Thames Path strategy that is cross-department and sort of and is resourced, and because that intersects then with all the different departments that because we found so many different departments working sort of engaged with it in different ways, whether it's transport, waste, business, culture, planning, regen. So bringing it all under kind of one umbrella would be really helpful. Just to kind of go through what we did with evidence gathering. So we looked at we focused on 4 areas. We aligned with the Thames Path quality standards as set out by Natural England, which is around experience, enhancement, engagement, and economy. So that's how we focused our evidence gathering. So we started with policy and strategic frameworks, which is on page 11 of the online report, or 78 in the pack. But then we wanted to look at a very multi-method approach. So I'll just sort of give you the headlines of where they are, and if anyone wants to ask more in detail, you're welcome to. But there was a public engagement survey where we had over 565 responses, and our website page was visited over 2,000 times with responses from residents. That's Appendix B. We looked at community engagement and lived experience of the path, people with maybe barriers with it, and did stuff with advocacy in Greenwich and others. We also did walk and talk site visits. So over 4 Saturdays in March, the panel walked the whole, like 3 kilometres, or however many, like a quarter of it each weekend. That's Appendix C. We organised a cycle ride along the path with sustrans, which was really helpful, and that's Appendix E, like everything that we came across as cyclists who would use it. We then have had our academic collaboration with the University of Greenwich, which is sort of in 2 parts. So I worked with Professor Ed Wall, and so one was we hosted a landscape architecture kind of workshop with professional practitioners, which was kind of incredibly inspiring, kind of lots of ideas about that. And then the second part was, which was also led by University of Greenwich, was a project they did with their students, university students, which was assessing the path, but also they looked at international comparisons with like Paris and New York and how others engage with it. The second academic collaboration we did was with University College London, who helped facilitate a systems thinking workshop, which I'd never heard of before, but it's basically how you present all your, you bring all the stakeholders together and how everyone interacts with the path, and that's where we developed a causal loop diagram for that, and that's Appendix G, and that was kind of like really fascinating to look at. There was also a stakeholders questionnaire, which is in Appendix H, which is for external stakeholders. There was an internal RBG questionnaire, which is Appendix I, and there was also a land ownership map, which is Appendix J, which was produced by officers in Place and Growth, who mapped the land ownership on the Thames Path, which we asked for, because we sort of found that there was actually not a centralised record in the council previously of all the land ownership along the river. Happy to go into more detail on any of those, but that's the overview of the evidence gathering. So then when we looked at recommendations, we, again, we've put them into 5 categories. The 4 original categories aligning with the standards by Natural England, so experience, enhancement, engagement, and economy. And we also added a 5th category about strategic delivery, which is about governance and oversight. There was like some really great principles that emerged, which is in the executive summary from UCL, which is just really fabulous language. I would just read it out to you, but might take up too much time, but it just really captured it. And yeah, so the experience recommendations were about accessibility and kind of user comfort, about surfacing, signage, lighting. That's recommendations 1 to 9. The enhancement recommendations from 10 to 15 are about kind of design, green infrastructure, connectivity. And the engagement recommendations 16 to 20 are about community stewardship, identity and heritage. The economy ones 21 to 25 are about animation, business integration, tourism. Strategic delivery is 26 to 31. And those are those. I'll just give you a very brief overview of what the UCL thing said, because it was just like, came across it really well. But so this is on the executive summary. It said, quality paths create quality experiences. Investment drives impact. Connected paths build connected communities. Safety, nature, and local life brings paths to life. And thoughtful planning makes thriving pathways. And there's more to that, but I think that kind of really encapsulated a lot of what we did. So, yes, happy to take any more questions from it. I really enjoyed it, I have to say. I loved it. I've spent the whole year being like, this is so interesting. This is great. And so I hope you endorse our recommendations, and that we'll give it to the leadership and cabinet for them to look at. And one of the things I found out through this whole process was that next year, 2026, is the 30th anniversary of the Thames Path being a designated trail. So it would be good for them to, the leadership, to time something, if they accept our recommendations, with that as well. But yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. I think it's, as I said before, a really brilliant piece of work and really shows what Scrutiny can do, particularly when we engage with stakeholders. I actually remember when this came through as a suggestion from one of the surveys we do about what should be on the work programme. And I think the suggestion was we map who owns which parts of the path. And you took that tiny bit and built it out with all the stakeholders to be such a comprehensive piece of work, which I think is really brilliant, because the mapping who owns what is just a tiny, tiny part of what this piece of work has ended up being. I'm really curious to know about your engagement with academics and how you got the universities on board, because I think that added so much colour and depth to the piece of work produced. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yes, definitely. So when I was first started working with Nasir, we talked about who could be on the panel, and he was like, it doesn't have to just be RBG people. So obviously we wanted councillors and officers, but we could expand that. So I kind of wanted to look at people. That was where I sort of thought the idea was I like to bring in like maybe academics or people from a more research perspective. And so I didn't cold kill, but I basically looked at I knew the University of Greenwich by reputation for landscape architecture. So I looked through their basically staff pages of which is the most appropriate person, and I found Professor Edwall, who has been amazing, and emailed him and said, this is what I wanted to do, would he like to be involved, or would he have any PhD students who'd like to be involved? And he was very keen, and that we've worked together now for the whole year, and he was instrumental in setting up this landscape architecture workshop we did with the University of Greenwich, which is also going to be profiled in the Landscape Institute Journal at the end of this month, which was just a really phenomenal experience of taking lots of professional practitioners, and also how involving his students as well, and what could be done in terms of their research, their engagement, and they're all credited in our creditors page. So that brought them on, and then also I also knew University College London by reputation in kind of this planning, placemaking arena. So I also emailed again somebody who then passed it on to somebody else, and then they came forward, and I was put in touch with the professors there about this sort of system thinking, and that's how that developed. And that was also just, I think, so it was basically like, I think also shows that like it's a good, people are interested in being involved. I was surprised that actually universities want to work with local councils, and vice versa, of how we can influence each other and help each other. But they added huge amounts of depth, and also having outside people who are not in the council little bubble that we are in sometimes, I think was hugely beneficial. But yeah, I don't know if we can do that in the future again, but it was worked very well.
Yeah, I think it really shows how good it is to be cheeky sometimes, because what we've managed to get from that is really quite phenomenal. So yeah, I can't believe you did that through cold emailing, so well done. The other thing I wanted to ask about is engagement with council. So obviously it's mentioned that using them as stakeholders, but how have the different directorates been? How engaged have they been? Do you think there is an appetite for the recommendations that you put forward? Or what do you envisage being the blockers?
I think have been very helpful. Obviously, so we had 2 officers on board from transport and planning, but also you guys have seen the internal survey. We also reached out to culture, who gave some really good recommendations, regeneration, who gave some good insight, business were very helpful as well. So I think I don't know how many of them would be yes or no to the final recommendations, but everyone was very helpful and sort of keen to kind of give their take on it, because I think so many directorates just interact with that space in different ways. So lots of them had good ideas.
Great. Councillor Fahy.
It's very encouraging to see a report that has engaged a whole range of people from outside the council. I think that's extremely important, really. I was extremely interested in the walking you did, and I noticed there are 97 pubs mentioned. So I suspect you didn't visit them all during the process. But I think the important issue is to drive this agenda in a very positive way. And there's limited information, I think, about cost. So is there a likely opportunity in advance of Cabinet to evaluate the likely cost of the project, which obviously could be done over time on a planned basis? And I'm just wondering if that's the next step. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know how much, as scrutiny chairs, I'll be involved in that. But I think the main kind of initial cost from the council would be in terms of resourcing, like kind of this kind of like, if they want to do it in terms of like a Thames path-wide sort of strategy and sort of putting that in place. I imagine that would be like the main initial cost. Obviously, there are sort of things that you would want to happen later on, but I think putting that framework in is the most important thing first, and that would probably be the first cost. But if you're asking me if I know how much that would cost, the answer is I do not know how much that would be.
Councillor Cousins.
Yes, I just wanted to say congratulations for on the report, but also as well, the Greenwich University are often dying and looking for research. That's what they do. So do work with them. It is a history that they have with the council where they do work, but sometimes it dries up, or maybe new intakes don't realize that that's the thing to do, but they have a history of working with Greenwich, so definitely well done on that. I'm glad to see that Peabody was involved. That's the main thing that I look for, because what they've done around the Thamesmead, Abbeywood area opened up the spaces. You could be on a bus and you're seeing it. Sometimes you don't even realize there's water down there as well. They've really opened it up. But so they'll definitely have a lot of ideas what to do, because they know what they're doing. They do have a biodiversity team and so on, which we don't, and etc. in the council. But what I would suggest is linking up with what John asked, the funding needs to come from Section 106 or SIL, or however you work it, money. This open spaces are crucial for our health and well-being, and it's not just about opening up the spaces and making them safe as a one-off. They have to be maintained. If you look at some of the casework, because we have walkways and cycle routes, and the Ridgeway in Thamesmead, which is above the Thames water conduit thing, it's always overgrown with bushes, and that makes them very scary. I managed to get a zebra crossing put in on a road so that a resident with disability could cross the road to go up the Ridgeway. But then when it's dark, so you've picked up those things, which is great, but it's about finding the funding. The funding is there. So I do think we need to look at how we're using something like Section 106, which honestly affects everyone. People are walking on it, cycling on it, leisure activity, shortcut to work and so on, getting from Thamesmead to Abbeywood side. They don't always use the transport. So it's like, yeah, let's get these spaces open and used. But that's where the money is. So maybe you need to put that in the report before it goes to officers, so that we're making that, not a demand, well, it's sort of like a demand, but making that hint.
Recommendation.
A recommendation, is that the word?
I think
that, yeah.
And that's a really good point, and really timely after the report we just had on SIL and Section 106. Because if we look at the strategic SIL, where so much of that was on Woolwich Station, maybe not specifically a recommendation, because I wouldn't want to mess too much with the report itself, but with a comment from we could endorse the recommendations and give a comment that a good way to consider funding this would be through strategic SIL going forwards. Yes, Councillor Cattell.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that help. And that is recommendation 30, which is to earmark developer contributions, including SIL and Section 106, from Riverside and nearby developments for Thames Path upgrades and improvements, because I think we definitely found that as well, as where there's development is happening like Riverside, you want to enhance it. I think going back to that kind of cost thing, it's like, if this is a very long-term strategy, as different parts of the river come up for development, how can you look at funding? And yes, the Peabody, Phil Askew from Peabody, who came, was brilliant in our workshop.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I'd just like to echo everybody's comments about how fantastic this report is. I really enjoyed reading it, and kind of wish I was joined for some of the walks along the Thames, but I have in the past walked along the Thames to the pub, and my uncle and aunt are regular walkers, so they'll be thrilled to see that, like, to hear about this project and hopefully make it kind of a nicer walk, which I know is one they do regularly. I guess the couple of questions that I had is, one, is there anything the review didn't include? And I've got a couple others, but if you wanted to do that one first.
Yes, I think there were things that almost like because it kept on expanding. Originally, we were going to finish this in like May, and then it kind of the work kept on expanding. So I think we had to have an end point. I think it sort of touches on what could be done about climate resilience, and like we looked at, you know, in that kind of thing area, but it didn't maybe like go into full depth. And I think that's maybe for another piece of work to look at. And there was also things like we for example, with the business section, we found like what kind of businesses were along the river, what they were, but we didn't do the next piece of like engaging with those businesses on the river, which is partly just a capacity issue of like all of our time and resources. But like it hopefully gives the blueprint of like if the recommendations are taken on by the kind of cabinet and leadership, like what they can do, what the departments they can do themselves if they want to take it forward. But we had to draw a line at some point of where.
Yeah, I think those points could also be drawn into the strategy, right? You've shown what can be done, and then all the additional points of engaging with businesses and looking at the climate resilience and everything else could all be part of the strategy that hopefully comes as a result of this.
Thanks. And when I was reading the report, it sort of reminded me of the green chain walk, which I'm a regular user of, which obviously goes across London. And I wondered whether you looked at that walk, and I think it's Transport for London managed, or are there any learnings from how that is done, or is there any work that I guess the council could do to look at how they manage it? Because I think it seems like there's a lot of investment into that walk. So that was just a question really. And then the final question was there anything that sort of surprised you as you were going through this project that you'd like to feedback?
No, thank you. So the green chain walk was brought up quite a few times by different people who brought it up, and one of our recommendation 31 was that maybe another piece of work is to look at develop a borough-wide programme to support other strategic trails, which is like could be the Capitol Ring, the Creekside Walk, in sort of ensuring that joined up planning and thinking. Because I think that when we were looking at this, occasionally people would be like, "Oh, what about the green chain or other walks as well?" So I think there's more work for the council if they want it to also like look at other kind of strategic trails in the borough, and maybe like apply some of this learning to that, which would be great. The things surprised me. One was that the actual, although I call this called the Thames Path Review, we actually found that the formal endpoint is the Woolwich Foot Tunnel. So I didn't know that. I thought it was the whole thing along, but actually that's the formal endpoint, which is why it's called Rethinking the Riverside, because we were like, actually, we'll look at the whole riverside. But I didn't know that until we started. That's gradually the name of it's been designated has been expanded. Another thing that came out, I think, very surprisingly in the surveys from the public was quite a lot about local pride, which was quite interesting. There's like a lot of the contributions are quite moving about like how people like see the river or like living there or like how they use it. I think that kind of came through, which was kind of really, really nice. And then the final surprising one, I think, was we did do a benchmarking with other boroughs. We tried to. We had a survey we sent to other boroughs, and no one was really responding. So we followed up, and everyone was just the people we'd asked were sort of like, it's crossing too many departments to give you a proper feedback, or B, it was more like, we haven't done this, can you do it and tell us what you come back with, like what you find and come back to us. So that was kind of like, surprising that I find out.
That was actually going to be one of my questions about, has anybody else done anything like this? And if not, we should definitely share the work, because how wonderful would it be for this to be across the Thames and not just within our section, if it were to go that far. Councillor Mbang.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And thank you for a very holistic presentation and your specific interest in the area as well. I think I have benefited the use of the Thames Path in many ways. I have actually been used the place not less than 10 times. I did organize a group of people that were up to 30, and we walked from the whole place from Woolwich here up to the O2, and it was just magnificent. And I think the health benefits of that is something that we should be very proud of, because in the long run, it makes people to actually, benefit a lot when it comes to their own well-being and health as well. And for people with disability as well, they enjoy the pathway. I think the observations I made were some of them I just want to raise. the fact I think Councillor Kezen did mention about some places are overgrown with grasses, sometimes when it rains, muddy sometimes as well. And also lightning. I also use that place also in the night as well. Some places it's a bit, you know, in the night it's a bit dark in some areas. And lastly, signposting. There were times where we had to come out all along to the main road and then to walk far away before we could find out where to actually locate. So those are just some observations you can take note of. Otherwise, I can tell you it's a very fantastic one, and I believe our residents, and especially within Woolwich Dockyard and the Arsenal area here, I know of people who have traveled to come and live in Greenwich because of the Thames. And because of the Thames, and of course because of the fact that they can walk along the Thames path, and I think it's something we should be proud of. Thank you.
No, definitely. Thank you very much. So yeah, our recommendations do cover like the need for sort of consistent maintenance, lighting, and sort of all that kind of thing. So I think that's what we all also observed, and specifically lighting as well, because there were quite a few areas where what came back in the public survey, and also just from like participants' own knowledge of where like you wouldn't feel safe to walk late when it's not set up.
Councillor Ayodele.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would also like to add my voice to the many in this committee. Had the privilege of joining Maisie on some of these walks, and the scale of effort that Maisie did take on for this was outstanding, and is testament to what councillors are prepared to do outside of their various regular jobs and commitments. So I just wanted to commend her for that. I really, really have to say that. And then also to kind of just talk a little bit about one of the things that Maisie's already touched on, but, you know, one of the things we really saw as a result of doing this report is just how much opportunity there is here when it comes to the interaction with the whole walk. One of the things that I've actually already sort of pledged or nudged Majid on is regarding the sale of the waterfront, and actually how potentially that development might interact with the Woolwich Foot Tunnel, because obviously that's a particular tunnel that has required ongoing maintenance, and it's been struggle. So one of the things that I think this empowers us as councillors to do is to say, like, look, we have this valuable natural walk path that, you know, could offer us a lot of investment opportunities as well, or investment in various forms. And I know we're already doing that with Visit Greenwich, which is a nice opportunity, but also, you know, with any new future developments. So the point I really wanted to make was, one, to commend Maisie, and then two, just to kind of labour on the point about there is actually so many opportunities, like Councillor Bimbang has said as well, the health benefits, and, you know, the way a lot of our community and a lot of our roads are looking, you know, people will, as a result, revert to using the walk more. So, you know, there's so much that can be done with this. And you're right. If we get the investment right, if we can find those pots of investment, I couldn't, you know, the opportunity here could go for 50 to 100 years. You know, that's the scale of the development. And just to kind of recap, one of the things we also noted was obviously how dated some of the various, let me call them, instruments that are on the riverside are. So, for example, I don't know what they call them again, but they're types of floats that you would use in the event that someone was, you know, going into the river. So that kind of stuff we need to look into. How is, I can't remember the word, but it's a very...
Life preservers?
It's like a... Yeah, a buoy, that's what it's called, a buoy. That's it, a buoy. So things like that, you know, how do we maintain, how do we monitor that? Because there's, you know, things like that shouldn't be overlooked, you know. So yeah, because that actually comes up in my casework, given that I'm on the riverside. So yeah, just a few comments there.
Great. If there are no further... Oh, sorry, Councillor Cousins.
Just, listening to all that, and I thought, when you were walking, were there any sites of heritage interest that perhaps need to be considered for maintaining as a site of heritage interest or something like that? I know, for example, at Marskey, where Marskey is, that when you start the walk there at the Woolwich Ferry, as you walk down a little bit, there's a lovely mosaic which is sort of broken and needs repairing and hopefully treasuring. So it's that sort of thing. So is that, I don't know if there's more of that. Those sort of things should be maintained, I'm thinking. And also as well, when I had the luxury of launching the cultural strategy, one of the things I mentioned was about the waterways, and that is also a cultural heritage. And maybe that's something where some of these cultural programs, I know there's water safety and everything that goes with it, but maybe we need to start thinking about the officers who are events teams, say, allocate some money for specific riverside type events. Peabody did actually have, I think they do it on an annual basis now, 2 or 3 years ago, and Councillor Avril Lacow actually went into the water. It was me, I stood on the riverbank. They actually allowed swimming, so they had lifeguards and so on. It was an organised event and had swimming in the river down in Thamesmead. It was too murky for me. I like to see where I'm going. But things like that are great, because it's fantastic memories, you know, people doing those.
Yeah, no, just to say I agree, and I think there's recommendations about sort of like cultural and the sort of cultural department like making more of it, and also sort of events and like pop-up things and things you can do along the whole kind of riverside to do. There was also quite a lot of good ideas about like different signage you could have of like maybe it's about the history of the areas or yeah, and how you kind of like can imaginatively use that, and then. Yeah, definitely in terms of heritage, it was something we observed of like you wanting to kind of preserve, and I know exactly which mosaic you're talking about. That sort of like what you want to sort of keep going, and also I think one of the nice things we sort of found about the whole river really is that our council's role is there's like lots of very different areas. You're going through some very modern, really like brand new modern like areas on the peninsula next to O2, and then you've got some really old areas, and then you've got like working industry areas. And sort of much more like natural habitats down towards Thamesmead, and it's just sort of like making you don't want it to all be the same. You want all the differences is really good. So it's just like how you just enhance all of those different areas. Yeah, I agree basically.
Yeah, one of the things I liked most about the recommendations of the report was the idea of like each section of the path having like a distinctive character. So your maritime, historical, ecological sections under that engagement, community stewardship, and identity and heritage section. Yeah, brilliant. So if there's no more questions or comments, are the committee happy to endorse the recommendations? Brilliant. Thank you very much. And a big thank you as well to Nazir, who couldn't be here, but as Maisie said, put so much work into this. So it'd be good to record it specifically in the minutes. Our thanks to him. Right, the final item on the agenda is the forward plan. Are the committee happy to note the upcoming executive decisions, and are there any items in there that we'd like to consider for scrutiny? No? Happy to note? Brilliant. The meeting is now closed. Thank you, everybody.